Hi, my name is Kristen Chrisman, and welcome to the grand finale, part 4. This is Peacemaking 104. I spent 21 years working on a multi-volume foreign policy series that I always hoped could be used, for example, in college peace studies programs. It's never been accepted for publishing, I think because it's so long, perhaps. But so we're doing a condensed peacemaking course right here. And let me set my timer to make sure I don't go overboard. We've talked about the Paradigm for Peace model, and the first element of that is the roots of violence, which we've talked about. Then the second element is the escalators of violence, which we've talked about. So now we're going to talk about the 3 facets of solutions, and this is a picture of it that I did. This one I did it years ago, right after 9/11. The 3 facets are the first facet of mental tools of human development, second facet legal tools of justice, and third facet physical tools of physical control. And I've updated this since then and put on more examples here, so I'm not even going to read these examples, but let me explain a little bit more. The first facet they're not all mental tools. They could be emotional tools, spiritual tools, and in the case of something like play, it's a physical tool also, but it's largely an individual type of development is what it is. So this includes things such as negotiation skills and communication. It includes parenting skills, love, friendship development, prejudice reduction. It includes understanding past wars, understanding alternatives to war, understanding non-conflict resolution skills, learning all of that. It involves developing a sense of affiliation, satisfying the need for love and belonging and friendship. And here's another version of the model that I drew long ago, probably the year after I created it. And I remember putting out a small presentation for this, and a woman asked me, but aren't these 3 things what the UN already does? And that was a very good question, really good. So I never had the chance to respond to the questions in the presentation, but my response is that, yeah, they go into this, but not the big thing that my model does is it emphasizes the first facet. This first facet has not been on center stage at all. What's been on center stage has been the third facet of physical tools, violent physical tools at that. And the other thing that's been on center stage is just a hostile approach to the whole thing. Like, my idea of Paradigm for Peace is largely to fulfill people's needs, including not just our own needs, but the enemies, the so-called enemies' needs. That's how you create peace. Find out what their fears are. But the way some of these tools are used now are, find out what they need and then use it as a bribe, or use it as a threat that we'll take this away from you unless you do what we want. And that's not what Paradigm for Peace is about. Paradigm for Peace is about love and caring and satisfying people's needs just as a right, not because they're doing you some favor. And it's interesting, Kenneth Boulding was his name. He wrote a book called The Faces of Power, I think it was called. And it was interesting because I'd already created this model, and I years later found this book of his. And his 3 faces of power actually correspond pretty well to my 3 facets. And he said that first facet is the most neglected and the most important one. And that's what I also say. So that's what I'd like how I'd like U.S. foreign policy, that's the direction I'd like it to go. Now, why are we here? We're here hopefully to learn, for me to express these ideas to you, which I very much appreciate your listening. But we're also here to try to make a difference in what's going on right now. So I'm hoping that you guys can perhaps take these ideas and with your own ideas and spread the word to the media, to the policymakers, and to the public. We've got to somehow change things. And I don't know how to get through to our leadership. I don't know if we can make a difference without our leadership, if we can role model things for them that maybe they can learn from. But if I were to ask you, how do we create peace? How do we create peace? The most important thing is we care. Whom do we care about? Ourselves? Well, yes, of course. It's very important to care about yourself and your family, your friends. Do we care just about our side of the conflict? No, we do care about our side of the conflict, but it's very important in peace to care about the other side of the conflict. And I have this sign here. One-sided empathy is dangerous. We need to develop 360 degrees of empathy all the way around. You read about sometimes a president visiting the Ukraine, for example, or Bush Jr. visiting suffering people in this country or that country. But if you just see the suffering of one side of a conflict, it can lead you to do very cruel things to the other side of conflict, which not only hurts them, but eventually ricochets back to these people. Or, as in what's happening in Ukraine, they get smushed in the middle, the Ukrainians. You've got to have 360 degrees of empathy, 360 degrees of understanding and caring. That's what our awful mainstream media is not promoting. They're just promoting one side of the conflict. And the other sign I would like to hold up is this. Caring for the other side does not equal appeasement. Satisfying the legitimate grievances of the other side, of the so-called enemy, does not equal appeasement. We've somehow been taught that the one and only lesson to be learned from World War II is appeasement at Munich led to the rise of Hitler and the awful Nazi machine. There's another lesson that was learned, but it's not emphasized so much. It's how World War I, the treaty at the end of it, sowed the seeds for World War II, because the treaty was so humiliating and one-sided and punitive towards Germany. But there's even more. In my unpublished works, I applied the Paradigm for Peace model to World War II Germany. And there are so many steps that could have been made to stop the rise of Hitler and the Nazi war machine. Appeasement at Munich wasn't the only mistake. Yes, it was a mistake because it caused the German people to believe that Hitler was a man of peace. They were brainwashed by their media and by Hitler into thinking that he was a man of peace and that he was always on the defensive, fighting against evil. So when he won the land at Munich, they thought, wow, he must be a great man. But there were many other non-violent steps that could have been taken, and steps to help Germany, such as help it out of its tremendous poverty, for example. So now I'm trying to stick to a time limit so that my camera doesn't shut off on me. So let's start with the first facet, mental tools. And in the very last video, I'm going to put these all together in a chart. These are just some of the first facet solutions, but they're the ones I consider the most important for right now for this conflict. And you'll notice they're not always particularly aimed at, they don't seem to be particularly aimed at this conflict, but that's because I'm getting at underlying problems, underlying waves, not just the ripples on the surface. So the very first thing, the very first solution is cooperative dialogue, not debate, not silencing. So often, always it seems, the U.S. policymakers don't pick up the phone and call the so-called enemy and say, hey, what's bothering you? What would you like me to do if you could have 3 wishes, you know? Let's talk. Let's try to work this out. They don't have dialogue at all. They have these kind of status ideas that we can't talk to the enemy, that rewards them. Talking to the enemy that's how you can create peace. And again, as I said in the last video, I'm not talking about debate either, where I try to beat you and with my line of the argument. Cooperative dialogue, there's different ways of going about cooperative dialogue. And by the way, cooperative dialogue is the 4th major part of my model, Paradigm for Peace. It's so fundamental. You have to have cooperative dialogue with other countries, within the U.S. government, because you see horrible dynamics going on in those meetings and within the Congress. No wonder it's horrible internationally. The U.S. has horrible patterns within its organizations of government, especially, and within corporations probably too. Some organizations have excellent procedures and habits of cooperative dialogue. They should be our role models. And you need cooperative dialogue in schools, not just a debate club, a cooperative dialogue club. So what you do is you express yourself clearly, strongly. Lay it all out there, what you're thinking. But then listen to the other side, or maybe they go first. Really listen. Ask questions, not sarcastic jibes, but really sincerely try to understand. Try to get in their shoes. And they try to get in your shoes, sincerely. And I find the key to getting in the other shoes is to pretend you're a good person with their thoughts. So don't think, oh, I'm such a jerk and look at these awful thoughts I have. Think of yourself as a good person having their fears and thoughts. And then you can really get in their shoes. And then sometimes in cooperative dialogue what's done is at the end, is then they actually switch points of view. Sincerely. They try to argue on the other's behalf. That really shows you're getting in their shoes. But then they come back to their own shoes. And then we get to our next step. So, but first of all, cooperative dialogue. All those roots of violence we talked about in the other videos need to be first listened to. The U.S. policymakers, or media makers, reporters, and if they're not doing it, then they're some of us. We have to talk to Russian policymakers, listen to what they say, get in their shoes, say what we think they can get in our shoes, and what we think isn't necessarily the same as what our U.S. policymakers think. But anyway, we try to get everybody understanding each other in a nice, kind conversation, nothing sarcastic. Then the second mental tool, integrative negotiation, not power-based. And there's different types of negotiation. Power-based negotiation is it seems to be the only thing that goes on amongst U.S. policymakers. You always hear them talking about, oh, I don't have enough leverage to negotiate with them. Leverage. That's like they want some kind of threat to intimidate them with, or bribe. We're not talking about threats and bribes. And power-based negotiations when, oh, we'll negotiate with you once we're in a powerful position militarily, because then you'll bend to our will. That's not what we want. That doesn't create everlasting peace to have them bend to our will. That creates a type of, it's not peace. It's just a temporary, controlled state, like with a vice, where you always have to watch it and have the military there enforcing it. That's not real peace. So then there's a type of negotiation called distributive negotiation, where you just try to like split everything up. But integrative negotiation is when you really try to understand their underlying fears and the most important fears that they have, and your fears. And you don't use their fears to go after them. And they shouldn't use your fears to go after your fears, like to haunt you with nightmares. They say you try to find the interests underlying the positions. Like if they say, oh, I want this piece of land. And then you find out why. Well, it's because we need a buffer zone. We're scared that you're going to attack us. Oh, okay, so you either need this piece of land, or maybe you need us to back up with our military apparatus. And then maybe you don't need that land. Maybe that land could be independent. But you find the underlying interest, because then you can have more room to negotiate. And also, it's very important to link issues. So often U.S. policy or negotiators, when I read about it anyway, they don't want to link issues, meaning they want to set the agenda themselves and say, okay, Russia or Iraq, we'll talk about this and this. Russia might want to talk about this, this, and this also. And the U.S. says, nope, we're just talking about this and this. But the thing is, this, and this might relate to this. Like say my neighbor's threatening me with machine guns, and so I'm threatening my neighbor with grenades. And they say, okay, we want to talk about your grenades. And I say, okay, we can talk about my grenades, but we want to talk about your machine guns too in the same negotiation. And they say, nope, we're just going to talk about your grenades. Now, why would I give up using my grenades if I'm not going to get any guarantee of security from their machine guns? Okay, that's just a very simple example, but it's extremely important to allow issues to be linked because they're often connected. Just like with Iraq, with Saddam Hussein, he would have allowed the inspections had the Americans not been on the team, because he felt, and he was right, that the U.S. was using the inspections to secretly spy on Iraq in order to plan an invasion to get rid of him. So the U.S. had two goals. The main goal actually was to get rid of him. The idea of having inspections became a secondary goal. But their goal of trying to get rid of him messed up their goal of allowing him the inspections. See, so you had two goals that were at loggerheads. And then we also didn't allow him to say, okay, we'll have the Americans off the team so that he can feel peaceful about the, and more trusting of the negotiation, of the inspections. Well, I better move on so I don't run out of time. Number 3 I have down here, first facet solution, sue the U.S. media, and if the CIA is behind it, as some articles suggest, sue the CIA for libel and recklessness in promoting this libel. Lying in books, lying. The written lies. The half-twisted truth and the lies that are in the New York Times and Reuters and the New York Post. I don't watch TV. I'm sure it's on the TV channels. Sue them, because they are spreading lies. So many reporters are. It's horrendous, and it's reckless. If they knew that they were going to be sued and hit in the pocketbook, you know, maybe they would care more. Next. Publicly evaluate U.S. policymakers' psychological patterns. And we've talked about those patterns with the mental escalators. Such as, I'll just mention them briefly. Lakoff's strict model. Alport's prejudiced personality. Sprenger's political lenses. And the idea of not having a mature, wise ego. That's in transactional analysis. Of having, instead, being ruled by these negative biases of the parent and child ego. But we talked about that in the Escalators of Violence video, as well as Essay 4B. So I'll move on. But that's extremely important. That should be a subject of campaigns. You know, we hear the stupidest things being talked about in the campaign coverage. It's really dumb, like all these little scandals. And why don't we talk about the psychological patterns? Not in a mean way where you're really going to slam them and put them down, but in a serious way about whether these policymakers actually have what it takes to create peace with other countries and to talk cooperatively amongst each other. Russian-U.S. prejudice reduction programs. That's really important. I remember reading in a book about some Russian-American prejudice reduction programs long ago between teenagers, and how they had such prejudices about each other in the beginning, but at the end, you know, they were best of friends, and they couldn't imagine ever wanting to hurt each other. See, that's what we want. We want it where people on both sides never want to hurt each other. We don't want to, like, build people up so they can kill, kill, kill. That's not evolution, that's de-evolution. So prejudice reduction programs are extremely important to reduce the current biases that are churning out and to correct the Cold War biases that were created. Publicly evaluate globalization, the market system, because these are being pushed by certain policymakers as if you want to be democratic and free, you have to have globalization, you have to have a free market system, and that's not true. These should be publicly evaluated. It shouldn't be, oh, you're a bad person if you talk against them. Reform culture and organizations' subcultures of competition, rivalry, status, and greed. This is really critical. This competition, again, the same dynamics that occur internationally, like between fossil fuel companies or countries, happen within the country and even within an organization. And these dynamics of rivalry, status, trying to put people down, and greed. If we can, these conflicts occur within organizations here, between organizations in the United States, and between countries. So wherever you are, if you can work at these fronts of conflict, wherever they are, and try to compassionately face the greed, status, rivalry, competition, and try to compassionately get rid of it. Fill people with other ways to feel self-esteem, rather than status and greed. Those are false ways to feel a sense of self-worth. Instead of feeling a sense of self-worth out of winning a rivalry, why not feel a sense of worth out of helping people, or out of having a real fun time together in a friendship? It's extremely important. Every culture has certain traits that dominate it more than other traits, and Ruth Benedict has written about this in Patterns of Culture. And I see competition as one that's really gone out of control in our country. And as she writes, it's the dominant traits that are most in need of a good pruning, because they can grow monstrous. And when you have competition in learning, kids get graded and compared with grades for learning. Now what does competition have to do with learning? It shouldn't have to do with it. It's competition for jobs. Competition even in recreation. It's taken over. Everything's hostile, competitive. Or even in a video game, it's killing. Competition even amongst churches for members. Everywhere. Again, wherever you are and wherever your circle of life is, if you can chip away at these things and replace them with feelings of love and joy, that would be helping a lot. But then we also have to immediately get at this internationally, or we're not even going to have a planet to live on. Let me see my time. Okay. I'll try to move more quickly so I can fit all three facets in. Publicly fund impartial media with 360-degree comprehensive reporting and empathy and nonviolent conflict resolution skills. And here's this chart. You know, I talk about the need for 360-degree empathy. So we need 360-degree comprehensive reporting. It's just ridiculous how we get these reports just on one side's suffering, one side's point of view. I mean, it's not even just the Ukrainian point of view. It's certain Ukrainians' point of view. It's not even comprehensive within the Ukraine. And then it would be ideal if some of these reporters could have nonviolent conflict resolution skills, and if when they did their reporting, they were really trying to help figure out problems and come up with solutions, get ideas from the people they're interviewing. Because a lot of people down at the civilian level, like me and like you, have good ideas. That would be awesome to read a paper like that. Next, require U.S. leaders to have proven record of impartial analysis, integrative negotiation, cooperative dialogue, and nonviolent conflict resolution skills. That, again, should be in the campaign. It should be a top focus. Expose the history of anti-Russian propaganda in the U.S. government, media, and in movies. Really talk about it and show how it was false. Show what was true and what was false. Demand that U.S. leaders prioritize caring for, quote, enemies, not conquering them. It's just sickening how Obama says, we will degrade ISIS. You know, and again, we had the whole one-sided news about them. We will destroy these people. We will kill them. We will defeat them. We will conquer them. Well, I'm not interested in that. I think a lot of Americans aren't interested in that. And those who are interested, probably a lot of them have been brainwashed by the propaganda to think, oh, we want them destroyed because they're totally evil. Okay? We want you. When are we going to get a U.S. president who says, okay, we're having a problem with this nation, but we're going to work it out. We're going to find out what's bothering this nation, what their fears are, and we're going to try to resolve their fears so that they feel secure. Because we're not going to have peace until the people we call enemies feel safe. Not by installing a new government of our choice, not by bribing or intimidating them. We want them to feel, we want peace that's natural, that springs from the heart and mind because you're living in a good climate. It's like a crystal where the molecules grow naturally, not held together by a vice in a certain shape. Expose demagoguery in U.S. leadership. Quote, in other words, we are good, they are evil, we must defeat or kill them. Expose that as demagoguery. Stop forcing us to believe that their enemies are our enemies. It is just so wrong how U.S. policymakers and media makers who are in cahoots with them try to manipulate us every single generation, every single conflict, to think that the enemies that the policymakers have are our enemies. They are not our enemies. Oh yeah, maybe some of them take it out on us, like the terrorists on 9/11. But they actually weren't angry with us. In fact, they were attacking symbols of the U.S. government and the economy and the Defense Department. The U.S. policymakers make enemies because of their personal decisions and their personal interest. They call it U.S. interest. It's not U.S. interest. It's their interest and the interest of their business colleagues. So stop making us believe that your enemies are our enemies, because we can make friends with those people over there. Require policymaker training in nurturant model foreign relations and negotiation. And I talk about the nurturant model in many of the essays. George Lakoff describes this. The strict father model, he calls it, and the nurturant parent model, he calls it. And I talk about it in the essay on mental escalators of violence. But the nurturant model of human relations is egalitarian. It's based upon caring for each other, understanding those are really valued, love for each other is valued, questioning the rules. Unlike the strict model where relationships are hierarchical, obedience without questioning is important, authority is important. So you see that strict model even in U.S. government policymaker meetings where somebody asks a question, oh, they glare at him, like, why? Why did he speak out of turn? Why did he even say anything? He's not supposed to be talking. You know, it's hierarchical even within the policymakers meetings. And it shouldn't be that way between nations either, where it's hierarchical and you do what I say or else I'm going to punish you. Strict model also values punishment as a strict model values rewards and punishments as the primary way of influencing the other's behavior, whether it's your child or your student, your spouse, or a criminal or another nation. Nurturant model does not. Nurturant model values most of all mutual caring and understanding as the way of influencing one another. And those of us who adhere to the nurturant model, we may not even, I didn't even know what it was called, but once I read about it, I thought, that's me. We have not been represented by U.S. policymakers in foreign policy ever. The foreign policy has always run along strict model lines. So those are my primary recommendations for the first facet of solutions. And I say get on these immediately, today, when you wake up, within your own circles, and try to get the U.S. leaders to get right onto this, starting with cooperative dialogue right away. Call up Putin. Putin, I'm sorry, we have not been listening to you. We've been trivializing your fears, scorning them. Our media has been dismissing them, saying that they're lies. They're not lies. Let me hear you talk about your fears so that we can address them. Okay. Second facet. Legal tools of justice. And I'm wondering, I've already gone through about half an hour, if I should make it a separate video. Well, I'll try to put it all in one, in case some people want it all in one. Second facet, legal tools of justice. No, I changed my mind. I'm going to turn it off now, the camera, and have the next video be on the second facet, okay? But thank you very, very much, and I hope you'll watch the next video now.